Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. We now turn to Santa Barbara. If you've never been there, this California city is one of the most beautiful on the West Coast. Last week, it was the scene of a horrific mass shooting. One of the victims' fathers is now becoming the new face for gun control. Richard Martinez lost his 20-year-old son Christopher in the shooting rampage. He is now blaming, quote, the irresponsible politicians who won't pass stricter gun control laws. Let's have a look and talk it out.
Thousands of students, faculty members, and other mourners remember the victims of a brutal rampage. Students return to campus for a day of mourning at the University of California. The father of one of the dead calls for stricter gun control.
Not one more.
Janet Napolitano, president of the University of California system, says the campus should come together to overcome its grief.
None of us wants to be here for an occasion like this, but we are. We are here because in this moment of loss, there is a human desire to come together, to reach out to one another for love.
These stabbings and shootings are the latest in a series of U.S. mass murders carried out by mentally ill attackers using legally purchased guns and ammunition.
Be the face of the gun control movement and has no interest in taking deer rifles and shotguns from the hands of hunters. But he says he plans to do whatever he can to keep guns out of the hands of people who use them for mass killings. Joining us now is Dr. Alex Morescu from St. Peter's University, Dr. Janie Feldman, a psychologist, and on the phone with us, we are very honored to have Mark Barden. He is the father of Daniel Barden, who was murdered in his first grade classroom on December 14th, 2012. Mark is also the advocacy director for Sandy Hook Promise. And Mark, we want to start off with you, and we thank you very much for being on the show. When you hear of another mass shooting, what goes through your mind? I mean, not again. I mean, I just can't imagine as the father of a child who was killed.
You're right. It is unimaginable, Mia, and yet the sad reality is that it does keep happening. You know, right? We just keep seeing evidence of that on what seems to be an increasingly frequent basis.
Now, you've taken some very courageous steps. You're working with Sandy Hook Promise. You also sent a letter to Mr. Martinez out in Santa Barbara. What was the purpose of your letter?
You know, in his very public reaction to the horrific loss of his son, we could all see that horrible anguish on his face. And just like everyone else, when I watched that, it was heartbreaking. But for me, I know what that anguish feels like. And I've been living it for over a year and a half now. And I know that he's being besieged with requests, you know, for comments. I just wanted to put it out there that he's not alone. You know, the unfortunate reality is that he's not alone. And if there's anything, you know, that I can do to help him on this journey, I just want him to know that I'm here for him.
Were you surprised when Mr. Martinez said that he wanted to reach out to the gunman's parents?
No, I know that feeling also. You have to wonder what's going on in the house. You know, I think it's very important that parents be very connected to their children and know what's going on. And you just, you know, you can't be there all the time, and especially as your children get older, they're more independent. But you do. I mean, as a parent, I don't know how you go through that either, being the parent of the perpetrator of such violence.
Well, Mark, hang on right there. We're going to ask Dr. Janie here also a few questions. First time on our show, so we thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We're seeing the same profile over and over again. Young men, mainly men. Why are we seeing this same profile?
Well, it's a great question. And first I have to say that as horrific as these events are, we still, from a scientific standpoint, should consider them rare. And because they're just not more common, we can't understand for sure. But there are some theories, and there is a professor at Northeastern, Dr. Jack Levin, who's got a theory of 6 factors that include things like chronic depression and frustration, being socially isolated, and being involved in a friendship group that is either non-existent or degenerate. having the tendency to blame outwardly things that go wrong, having something catastrophic go wrong, and of course the access to those weapons and the training.
I want to ask you something, a step that I've been pretty outspoken about in terms of the media. The media, obviously, we have 24/7 media coverage now of these events where people are seeing them over and over again, but it also gives the gunmen, obviously, thrust them into the spotlight.
Yes.
Do you believe in the copycat theory that some of these guys just really want a little bit of fame?
Well, you know, I think there may be some who have looked for that, and the one shooter that you referenced from last year in Connecticut seemed to have quite a collection of memorabilia and things, and so for that individual, I would say notoriety was definitely a factor. For the one that we're talking about this week, unfortunately, it seems to be more about revenge. And there seems to be an overwhelming presence of shame and humiliation in these people, and a lack of resources of what else to do when someone is that troubled.
And I commend you for not using the shooters' names. I will not say any of the shooters' names ever again when I think the public has a right to know.
That's a great thing.
But I don't know. So I thank you very much for doing that. Dr. Maresco, you work with a lot of young kids. On the college campuses, is there a different feel? Do you think that kids are more concerned about safety?
That's a fantastic question. Because obviously this is a university campus where this took place. You know, it's regretfully, with the cyclical fashion of U.S. media when these things happen, it kind of gets to a point of desensitization. And regretfully, I mean, I think just also in the day and age of how quick our media moves, and if 2 or 3 days later, the topic has kind of is passé, and students don't embrace it that much anymore. You know, that it happened in California, 6-hour flight away, might not have been something that would have resonated so heavily with our students, but it is something that comes up, and public safety, at least at our students at St. Peter's University, is taken very, very seriously.
Now, Dee Dee, we know that you are a pro-gun person, and in today's world right now, this father is saying that he does not want to take the rifles out of the deer hunters, but he is saying that there should be stricter gun laws.
Yeah, I disagree with that. And obviously it's very tragic. We're very sorry about the loss and the deaths. However, it's not the guns, it's the mental illness. And this is what it gets to. It gets to the registry. How does that work? Because it's on the books now that felons cannot have guns, nor those with mental illness. But think about it, there are privacy issues. How do you find out if they have mental illness? And a lot of people you're never going to know. So the devil's in the details of that, because people are not going to get treatment if they think it's going to be made public. So there are privacy issues, and there's just a lot of questions that need to be answered, but I do not think we need stricter gun laws. However, the registry for mental illness, how do we go about that? I don't know.
Well, mental health all comes down to money also, and so
Yes.
many budgets have been cut, which is obviously, but one of the things, Mark, that I was talking about was more of a multi-pronged approach, perhaps stricter gun laws, perhaps more mental health issues, and as well as the press also taking a role in this. What are your thoughts on that? And what would you say? What do you think is the answer?
Definitely multi-pronged, right? You mentioned social isolation a little while ago. That is something we hold dear to us personally. Our little Daniel was known by his teachers as a kid that would notice if somebody were sitting alone and want to reach out to that individual, and would ask to be excused from an activity to go sit with them. We actually started our Facebook site around that, What Would Daniel Do? And it has gotten a lot of traction. A lot of folks are engaged in that. And yeah, definitely we need to address our gun laws. We absolutely need to do that. Right now, the background check system is not complete, right? So there are loopholes in the internet where folks can buy firearms anonymously. So we need to fix that. We need to do a better job of making sure that the people who shouldn't have guns shouldn't have access to them, right? You have child access prevention. We need to do a lot of work there. 3-year-olds are finding a loaded firearm on the coffee table. We need to address that. There's a lot of room for improvement. that does not infringe on anybody's rights, but just supports responsible gun use and responsible gun ownership.
And we saw pictures of your little boy there. He was absolutely beautiful. When you heard this story in Santa Barbara, Mark, were you? I mean, there was a certain amount of anger I think people had because the police officers had gone to the house and had assessed this man, and they found him to be okay, and obviously he wasn't.
Right. So yeah. Again, it goes back to we need to do a better job at who gets into the NICS, the instant background check system, and Congress just the House of Representatives just passed an appropriations bill this week that's going to help that afford states more funding to do a better job at that. So that's that's probably primary, especially with us at the Sandy Hook Promise. We do a lot of work in the cultural space, but we also want to address the issue of making sure that folks that shouldn't have firearms don't have access to them.
Dr. Janie, you also talked about social isolation, and,
yes.
and we talk about that, and we see kids more and more. You've got television, you've got your devices, you've got everything. You think that's playing a role in this as well, and making kids more inward thinking and less apt to be social?
That is a really great point, and absolutely. What happens with kids today is they are very socially isolated. I see a lot of kids in my own friendship therapy groups because they could be sitting next to one another and their faces are here and they just don't know how to relate. And apart from obvious needs for improving mental health access and removing the stigma from obtaining the mental health services, as you had mentioned, I think some social training in the classroom would be ideal to help kids be more empathetic with one another.
I think that's where the money needs to go, not preventing guns. And I think guns are not the problem. Again, trying to figure out when a problem starts. I mean, if these kids are sitting isolated, they've got problems, where's the money to help them? I mean, where do you go from there? You would know, and I think that's what the focus needs to be.
I think it's a multi.
I want to agree with what the speaker said earlier, Mr. Martin. It's a multi-pronged approach. Like, this is not going to take. There's not just one golden resolution that will solve all this problem. That it very clearly is a public health issue. It is very clearly too easy in too many states to get too dangerous weapons. That's just the fact. And
I disagree with that, but that's fine.
If I can build on that, I think Dee Dee said that we should be putting our money in one thing and not the other. I think when we're faced with a situation where 32,000 people are dying every year in this country to gun violence, we don't have the luxury of being selective. I think we have to do all of it.
Great point there, Mark. And Mark, thank you very much for taking the time to be on Fresh Outlook. We certainly appreciate your insights. Dr. Janie, thank you for being here as well for the first time. All right, we will be right back with much more. We've heard from Edward Snowden a few times before, but this week he gave his first interview to an American network inside a Moscow hotel. We'll be back with more on that when we return.